Finally I got the damn thing to turn. And how did I do it? Well, I had to resort to using a punch and hitting each of the holes in sequence to try and drive that ring loose. That is not a recommended camera repair technique, and it's not one that I have used in recent years. Right, let's see what we've got here. The flash connection is connected there by just a single screw. Let's disconnect that now. And there is our shutter loose from the body. And here's our retaining ring. And what was the fuss all about? That is really tight on those threads. There's a lot of filth in the threads. I really don't know whether that was lacquered in there or whether that's corrosion. I'll just put this little screw back on the flash contact here so I don't lose it. And of course that screw started. That's better. I'll pop that shutter to one side, or that retaining, that spacer, I must remember that goes there. I'm looking at the mount here to see what this is like. If there's anything clever here I need to be aware of. A little bit dusty looking. Good, the bellows popped free, that's good. Means I've got access to those bellows now to manoeuvre them about and get to these tears in the bellows here. I'm going to apply a patch to the inside and probably a patch to the outside, and I'm hopeful I can make a successful repair there. It's certainly quite split. So I'll need to probably put some masking tape on the outside and stick these fragments back down before I put a patch over them. That feels very brittle. Quite dry and brittle feeling. I think the bellows ideally would be replaced, but finding bellows to suit would probably be pretty impossible. Here's some masking tape, there's some painter's tape on the outside to hold that flat, and then I can glue something to the inside, I think is the secret. I've got some rubberized silk here. It's shutter curtain material, and I'm just going to apply a patch of this to the inside. Of course you can see nothing in there because it's as black as. I'll leave that to dry. Once that glue's set, then I'll see about folding the pleats back into those bellows and hopefully it'll all go well. I will probably put a patch on the outside. Seikosha-Rapid. This shutter is from the Suzuki Optical Company. What's this camera called again? Press van. So I'm going to be into this and start servicing it. I'm not expecting too many great surprises. It's a long time since I've had to service a shutter like this, but it looks fairly conventional to me. So we'll take the front off. What have we got? Well, if you didn't see the name on the bottom of that, you'd think that was Seikosha-Rapid. It's basically the same design as a Seikosha-Rapid shutter. The parts certainly wouldn't be interchangeable. They're slightly different shapes, but they serve the same purposes and they're all doing the same jobs in the same places. So I'll just unhook the main spring. That, for reasons best known to itself, doesn't want to come free. Remove this piece, which is typically referred to as the main lever. Let's have a look in here. That's our shutter release lever. That's a bit stiff. This little block here, that would take a cable release if the shutter had been so set up. I'll just hold this lever back so I can get access to that screw and remove that screw. That whole block should lift out with a bit of luck. Is that screw loose? Yes, it is. Okay. So that little block and its screw can come loose. This is the high-speed spring, the 500th of a second spring. Just unhook this spring from the case. This lever can come out. That's the return spring for the shutter release. This spring here looks to me to be somewhat odd shaped. I think that's probably been bent and probably catches on things. We'll check that. Anyway, a single screw here should take that lever off. And a single screw here should hold this lever. This is the B lever, and the tip of this lever looks a little bit unusual shape. It's curved down. It looks like it was meant to be curved down. It doesn't look like that's damage. Here, what difference have we got here? We've got our flash contact. Now that's something a bit unusual. I've got to see how that's hooked up. What's it using for a spring? There's a contact here floating, and then the lever itself seems to have a spring on it, but I can't see where the spring acts. Now that little piece there, that floating contact, that would have been held by that screw, but when I undid the screw it fell off. Okay, I've got to take note of that. Means that screw is doing very little. Let's just take that plate off. That plate may come off, complete with contact. Could that be done? Yes, that could. That was probably the best way to take that off. Let's just put that contact together. And that would be then put back on the shutter, hooked in there, screwed into place. Yes. Okay, so I should have left that the wire attached to this and just removed this piece entirely by the looks of it. Okay, no harm done. So this flash contact, it's obviously got a return. Oh, it's got a return spring here. And there's another return spring somewhere. Let's take the pivot pin out of the centre and hold this carefully so pieces don't go flying across the room, never to be seen again. Take that pin off. There's our lever, and it does have a spring underneath it. It's the same spring as returns the blades. So it's a spring doing both jobs. And the spring actually passes through a hole in this lever. That's very unusual. Let's unhook that from there. Lift off that spring entirely. And then we're left with just the contact floating here. There may be something holding that on the back there. It probably lifts off with the mechanism plate. Or the mechanism plate can probably be separated from the case at this stage. There'll be 3 screws at the back, I expect, if it's a copy of the Seikosha-Rapid. The screws are a different shape heads. I wouldn't guarantee that the locations match up, but the basic layout, as I say, is the same as the Seikosha-Rapid shutter. Right, and split the case. Now, what have we got here? We have got 6 blades. 6 blades in 5 positions means that one of the blades is a cover blade. It goes in the same position as blade number 1. Well, since that flew to pieces for me before I really had a chance to see exactly where things went, I'll assume that blade number 1 is the same position as it would be for a Seikosha-Rapid, which is here. I was checking this blade actuating ring here, and it's sticky. Let's take the lever off the top. I've got no idea how long ago this shutter was last serviced, if ever. And the camera itself is certainly post-war, but I would have thought mid-50s. I'll look up and see what I can find out about the history. Now, there's probably 3 screws hold this retainer plate in place. They may or may not be all the same length. On a Seikosha-Rapid, typically one of the screws will be longer than the other 2. And it would have been this one. In this case, it's the same length as the other 2. Lift off that retainer plate and the blade actuating ring here. So our mechanism plate's stripped down. I've still got my retard gear train on here, and I'm going to clean that in place. I'm not going to take that off and clean it. Generally cleaning it in place is good enough. Just very occasionally you may find one that's stubborn, that has a lot of contamination of dust or dried grease, and it has to be taken off and cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner in solvent. There's a few marks here, and I think that's grease, not corrosion. Yeah, it's certainly got that look about it. So all of this needs to be cleaned and put back together. So while I think about that, I'm looking at the case here. And the case, of course, has our diaphragm blades in it. And I'm looking to see how similar this is to the Seikosha-Rapid. and it is certainly like the earlier Contour Rapids. I cannot remove the setting lever with the blades in place. Later Contour Rapids had a little cutout here and here so that you could access those screws for the settings lever. So you could take the settings lever off, and it makes it much easier to assemble the shutter if you've got it split in that fashion. Anyway, let's have a look at this. I'm looking at the state of these blades now. There's certainly some dirty marks on those blades there, and I really don't know whether that's corrosion or dirty old grease. One way or another, I'd say we're going to find out. How many blades have I got here? I don't like the look of this. 10 blades. Okay, well 10 blades is doable. Three screws hold the retainer plate in position. And is it keyed? On the Contour Rapids, the plates are keyed so that you can guaranteed to put them back in the right position. Yeah, no, it's alright. The screw holes are not equally spaced, so I can see which way that plate goes back on. Right, so here's our settings lever, and here is the moving plate from the inside connected to the settings lever, and of course there are two screws that hold this together, and they are loose. Well, let's get that retainer ring off there so we can separate this. And here I've got my shutter all in small pieces, all ready to be cleaned and reassembled. Let the clean-up process commence. So, with naphtha on a cotton bud, I'm going to clean this case inside and out to remove all traces of old dust, dirt, grease, corrosion, anything that shouldn't be there. You can see the colour of that, there's plenty of dirt coming off. This is by no means a dirty shutter, but I want all of that rubbish out of there. Cleaning the outside of the case. Now there's another shim here which I hadn't spotted earlier. Oh, in fact there's a pair of them. I'll remove those and put them aside so I don't damage them. Those shims are there to adjust the position of the lens relative to the film plane. Just checking that that positioning screw there, which locates the shutter in the camera, was tight. It's good. Right, that's the case. Here we have the moving ring from the inside, the piece that is swung to the left or the right and swings the diaphragm blades inwards and outwards accordingly. I'm just cleaning this. Like the case, it's quite clean. Our setting lever. This is the lever from the outside of the shutter that couples to the plate you've just seen, and this is the lever that you move to change your aperture settings. Likewise, that's quite clean. Now there are two shoulder screws here that hold these components together, so I will assemble these together and then clean the diaphragm blades, which you can see in front of me have got rusty stains on them, which is not a good thing. So I'll run a little bit of molybdenum paste on the inside of that and that flat face where it runs against the case. Now I'm fairly confident that that lever will be at the bottom of the shutter, not at the top of the shutter. This plate, the holes are slightly countersunk on one side for the heads of the screws, so I can see which way round that goes. And I'll fit these screws in position. That's both of them in place. Now I'll tighten them up. Don't over tighten them because you'll only end up stripping the thread. Right, that moves smoothly, no problems there. That's ready to go. Let's look at this. I've got the retainer plate. That looks quite clean. We'll give that a quick clean. Yeah, there's not much coming off that. That's good. Pop that to one side. Now the diaphragm blades. Now some of these are pretty bad, as you can see. Look at the state of that. That looks like rust to me, and I'll have to see if that'll clean off. And I want a different pair of tweezers because it's handy to have a different shape here so I can hold these blades while I'm working on them. The blades are quite delicate. Don't apply a great deal of force to them, and don't do that, what I just did. These blades are unusually fragile. I'm going to have to spend some time straightening that out. Normally these blades on the contours are much more robust than that. Now what happened there was my cotton bud picked up the edge of that blade on the return stroke and folded it over. Now this blade's quite crusty here. It's got quite a bit of rust on it. Now if these were shutter blades and they showed marks like that, I'd probably polish them with some Brasso. But diaphragm blades are a little bit fragile and easily damaged, and so I don't. Now these blades are thinner material than the similar blades from a contour shutter. That means that they are more easily damaged. You can see this mess coming off here. It's like a rust stain that doesn't appear to be a deep corrosion problem, but it's certainly right on the surface. I've got to go through these blades one by one and get this rubbish off here. With a bit of luck they'll clean up well. I could polish these with Brasso to remove that completely. As I say, I don't like doing it. I may have to. Let's pop that to one side. Let's have a look at this ugly one. Oh, these are papery thin. They're not as robust as the ones from a Seikosha-Rapid would be. Now I'm going to see if I can straighten this blade up and I don't dare bend it round anything sharp because I don't want any sharp angles in here. I'm just trying to force out that quite gentle curve that I've got here. Yeah, it's that filth on the blade, that's what's caught my cotton bud. I probably didn't even go over the end of the blade, it probably just picked up on some of that filth. It's like lumps and bumps. Right. I haven't made this mistake in a long, long time. It's quite important that these blades be nice and flat, because if they're not nice and flat, they're very, very hard to reposition, to reassemble. I'm certainly getting there. The action of the blades of changing the aperture will also be unusually stiff if the blades are distorted. So it's really important that they remain undistorted. So that's looking pretty good. Bending the blade straight is a case of applying forces in the right position, in the right direction. The metal in these blades is often quite hard. It's often like a spring steel. They can be brittle. You can fracture blades. They can tear. Just looking at the state of this blade now. It's pretty good. It's not as flat as I'd like it, but it's a lot flatter than I thought it might be. See if I can roll a bit more of that out of it. There's still a bit of a bend there. Right, I think that'll do. Well, I'm going to try cleaning these blades with a bit of brass soap. As I said, I didn't like doing, because they're going to need it. Right, I've got some brasso polish here. I'm going to hold this blade on my wooden block with the pivot over a hole so that I don't damage the blade. And I'll do these patches of corrosion, hopefully that they'll polish smooth. You can feel when you've got the blade smooth because the cotton bud will run smoothly over the metal. It won't catch. If it's not smooth, the cotton bud will catch and you'll feel it. Now the other face of this blade, what's that like? Okay, that looks better. Now I'm just going to clean this with some naphtha and see what the blade looks like after that. There are 10 blades, so this is going to be a tedious business. Now I can certainly still see that bend in that blade. I'm going to have more work on that. But the rust stain is largely gone. There's still a mark there, but it's below the surface of the metal. It's like a scratch or a dent in the scratch in the metal, so it's not going to catch on anything. Well, that blade's otherwise is in good state. I think I can carry on. So I'm going to have to work through these 10 blades and just doing some more work on that little bend. I'll work through my 10 blades. When I'm ready to put them back together, you can watch as I struggle on the assembly jig, putting everything together. The blades are not symmetrical. They've got a rivet at each end, but the rivet is close to the centre of the blade at this end, and it's close to the edge of the blade on this end. It's important that you note that because that has a great bearing on how the blades are assembled into the shutter. Right, I'll clean all these blades and you can watch me put it back together.